Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Governor. We're opposed to this bill because primarily and frankly the preamble that talks about so many of the things that we find are not true. I'm not going to bore you with it. We've passed out to you at least 5 pages of a short statement on all the issues. We did it last week and again this morning. We hope you'll take a look at it. We're willing to work with the senator at your suggestion, Mr. Chairman, to see if we can't come up with better language. An awful lot of concern on the part of everybody. We share concerns, but so many of the facts seem to be at risk here. Real quickly, 90% of hydraulic fracturing water is water, 9.5% sand, 5% chemical additives. They are sodium chloride, ethylene glycol, borate salt, sodium and potassium carbonate, guar gum, and isopropanol. All those are common. They're used in everyday applications. And they can be reused and recycled so they don't get into the stream. One of the things that New Jersey is part of is a cradle-to-grave mechanism to track commercial hazardous wastewater. Been a part of that for a long time. I'm shocked to hear all the examples of where this fracking wastewater has gone in New Jersey. I don't know any specific examples. Where was it treated? Did it have a permit? What level were those permits set at for those substances? We don't know the answers to that, just that somewhere commercial entities are taking this stuff in nefariously in the dark of night and polluting the ocean. That's what it boils down to. I'm not going to go over the benefits of fracking and natural gas. We've litigated that before, and I think my side won. I think the evidence is in about the commercial benefits of natural gas through the fracking part. Sorry. But I think we really need to have an understanding of where the material comes from, what happens to it when it gets here. Does it have to get a permit? Yes. Where does it get a permit from? DEP. If DEP doesn't think that it's safe, do you think DEP will give it a permit to be commercially disposed of in New Jersey? Or are my opponents correct that the governor is such a nefarious devil that he would literally poison the ocean in which we swim? I'm opposed to this for a lot of good reasons. The ocean, the rivers, the drinking water. I mean, I find that hard to believe. I mean, we have faith in the department in the vast majority of cases to do the correct thing for the environment. Frankly, from an industrial standpoint, we want them to do that. To think that they would let these people get off the hook and dump in the middle of the night, kind of straining credulity here. We're opposed to the bill. We'd be more than glad to work with the sponsor, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Don't go away.
Huh?
Is it the position of the Chemistry Council of New Jersey that this waste is already regulated?
Well, I think
it's already regulated to the extent necessary to protect the public.
I'm not sure about to the extent. I don't know what the regulations specifically say. We'd be more than glad to talk about those. But no one can discharge commercial hazardous wastewater in the state of New Jersey without getting a permit. The permits are established specifically with regard to the material and what levels of those substances should be regulated, over which you can't get a permit. So it's my understanding that, yes, it is regulated.
And therefore doesn't need further regulation.
Well, if there's new information and the science gets better all the time, then I would think that the department would and should take that into consideration. We'd be more than willing to get some scientists and some chemists to discuss with the department what we think is correct relative to those substances. But let me give you an example. Guar, which was one of the things that I mentioned, is found in ice cream. it's part of the process to get the natural gas in the fracking process up out of the ground. Sodium and potassium carbonate used in detergents, part of daily wastewater stream going to local municipalities. So it's not all strange and nefarious things being regulated. I would think that given the cradle-to-grave system that the country has and the state's part of, that we should be able to track this material. I don't know why, frankly, anyone in their right mind, from a business point of view, would want to bring anything into New Jersey for treatment, given the thousands of people who would bother them for the next 100 days. I understand there's a national campaign going on. Again, I apologize. I understand it's important to the groups from their financial perspective. I get all that. That's why they're all here again today. But very frankly, I think you need to have some real scientific discussions with the agency about what's possible and what you shouldn't do. Okay?
So in the materials that you gave to us on page 3, the Chemical Industry Council, the Chemistry Council, starts illustrating issues. So the first issue is, issue number 1, hydraulic fracturing liquid is not a variable which is brewed. And the paper goes on to say that anti-hydraulic fracturing activists often say that hydraulic fracturing liquid is a, quote, variable which is brewed of toxic substances. This is not true. The hydraulic fracturing liquid is approximately 90% water, 9.5% sand, 0.5% chemical additives, respectively. The 0.5% of chemical additives is composed mostly of sodium chloride, ethylene glycol, borate salts, sodium and potassium carbonate, GAR, GUAR gum, and isopropanol. When we take a close look at these chemical additives, we find they are in our kitchen, in our house, as everyday chemicals. And I assume the council stands by it because you wouldn't be saying it otherwise. What I don't see here is a description of the contents of the waste. Is it true that the waste from hydraulic fracturing contains radioactive materials?
I've heard that, and I've read articles about that, simply because as you extract the wastewater after it's used from the ground, naturally occurring radium may come up with that water.
Okay. Do you know of a sewage treatment plant that can handle radioactive materials?
I do. There's one in South Jersey.
How do they do it?
Well, it's a chemical process to make sure that all those materials, whether they're the one you mentioned or the others, are neutralized and non-environmentally impacting. But of course, it couldn't matter.
I don't know of any way to end radioactivity other than a half-life where radioactive.
It's all about the amount of any material that's the problem. But the bottom line is, if the department thinks in its wisdom that radium or water containing radium or any other substance poses a threat to the environment, I would opine that the department will not give them a permit to do that.
Well, that your issue number 2, hydraulic fracking water is regulated. And in that, at the bottom of page 4, you say any suggestion that wastewater was discharged in New Jersey with no environmental standards or permitting constraints is completely untrue. Wastewater is regulated by the NJDEP through the Clean Water Act with the issuance of NJDPES industrial permits. The comment earlier, I asked the question, is this already regulated? The comment was that in the federal law, 2005, there were amendments in that law to the Clean Water Act that exempted hydraulic fracturing materials from those types of regulations.
And I think I've read somewhere.
Is that true or not true?
Well, it may be true, but not without the spin on it. It wasn't regulated in that area because it was thought to be of a small enough problem that it could be regulated under other regulatory structures. So while it's not regulated under one, I'm told that it's regulated under 3 or 4 other federal statutes, and it's clearly regulated by New Jersey's and the gypsies permits. clearly has not been exempted out.
The gypsies is federal, and it's a delegation, I think.
That's correct, but we run that delegated program
So
in New Jersey.
If it was exempted, if fracturing waste was exempted from that, it would sound like there's an exemption.
And maybe that's something that the department ought to answer for you. I don't want to presuppose that my judgment about that is any better than theirs.
All right, at the top of page 5, you say, this permitting process makes the need for a ban for shipping fracking liquid to New Jersey a moot point, especially since there are no commercial wastewater treatment facilities in New Jersey that are attempting to handle hydraulic fracking waste water. So is it the position of CCNJ that this is not going on in New Jersey?
It's my understanding that, at least from the commercial standpoint, that no one is handling this waste on a commercial basis, number one. And number two, it would seem to me that if any municipal or county sewage authority were to want to accept this waste for its own commercial and financial well-being, it would have to get a permit. And the department then should know who's got a permit. I don't delve into the Gypsies permit file on a daily basis, but somebody at the department does. And I'm not trying to throw them under the bus here. I'm just saying that there is
John's
an answer.
making copious notes. He's taking it back to the commissioner. So in item 3, you say fracking waste is subject to cradle-to-grave management. And in your first paragraph, say, in addition to the wastewater issue, activists claim that the EPA exempted hydraulic fracking waste from Resource Conservation and Recovery Act requirements. In reality, EPA made a determination to exempt the waste products water from RCRA subtitle C because it found that other state and federal programs could protect human health and the environment more effectively. Honestly, I'm not hearing that from anybody, that people feel that this waste
Well, so far you've heard from a bunch of people who are unalterably opposed to the whole issue of natural gas through fracking development. So number one, they're biased and prejudiced toward anything that comes after that. Their bottom line is they don't want fracking anywhere. They don't want the cheap natural gas because they're opposed in all instances to anything that comes from a hydrocarbon. That's the bottom line.
Well, let me ask you this. You are saying, though, that this is not subject to RCRA.
Not to RCRA, no. But again, the bottom line is that doesn't take it out of the other regulatory imperatives that the state and federal government have.
The only one that I knew that was cradle to the grave was RCRA. So I'd appreciate a follow-up.
Well, wastewater, commercial wastewater has, if it does have hazardous substance into it, and it must also go through the rigorous deal. And again, I'll be willing to say that I'm wrong if the department comes to you and says we can't regulate that because Dick Cheney wrote it out of RCRA. And if they do that, I'm wrong, and I'll apologize for that.
Well, I tell you what, I'd appreciate a follow-up from the Chemical Industry Council, especially on that cradle to the grave. You have the statement, fracking waste is subject to cradle to the grave management. And if RCRA is excluded, I'd love to hear from CCNJ as to what does regulate. Okay? And as I guess, your testimony in opposition is totally different than the other testimony in opposition. Your position, as I understand it, this is totally unneeded, whereas the other group, many of the other people who are in opposition are taking the position that it takes away the incentive to do an outright ban. So I see that as 180 degrees different.
And I'd be opposed to an outright ban. But I'm also saying on behalf of the folks who make some of those materials, we're certainly willing to talk with the department about a regulatory schematic that will protect the environment and the people. We're not opposed to the regulation of this material at all. I don't want to leave that as a mistaken point. The bottom line here is that for whatever reason, you haven't, in my mind anyway, heard the positive benefits of natural gas, which comes to this process. I think everybody in the oil industry and the chemical industry are committed and willing to work cooperatively to protect the environment and the people who live in this world from any of the problems. That's what the regulatory structure is all about. And as I said,
if John Jones, the nefarious guy in the middle of the night from Pennsylvania, can take a tanker truckload of fracking wastewater and take it into Diane Allen's district and discharge it, then that's obviously wrong. It shouldn't happen. There has to be some way to find out what the facts are here. How much wastewater has actually come into New Jersey in the last 10 years? My guess is a small amount. Where has it gone? I don't know. Nobody ever says where. I know where it hasn't gone, because the large commercial wastewater facility that DuPont now Chemours used to run is not willing to take that material. Not because it can't handle it, and not because from a scientific or chemistry point of view it can't do it safely and environmentally soundly. They don't want to handle it because they know about this campaign that my friends on the other side are running in order to deny people cheaper energy, cheaper products and raw materials that come from fracking of natural gas.
Al, we appreciate you coming in. Senator Thompson.
We've had a lot of discussion about the DEP's regulations for treatment of wastewater and so on, et cetera. Aren't the regulations generally written to restrict the output from the facility rather than the input to the facility? That is, tends to regulate what the water can be like when it comes out rather than restricting what comes in. Because generally, they don't know what's coming in. I mean, we speak of doing analysis here, but they get wastewater coming in from all sorts of places, and they don't know what's in that wastewater. And likewise, I mean, you know, if you're talking about bringing 1 gallon of waste in that has a high level of some kind of material, which at that concentration you wouldn't want it out in the drinking water, but obviously by the time it gets into the effluent, it's nowhere near that concentration. For example, we've had people speak about perhaps a radioactive material in here. Well, of course, there is a certain level of radioactive material that would be deemed to be acceptable and not hazardous. So the fact you've got radioactive material doesn't automatically say, oh, no, you can't have that in the drinking water. If you get it down to parts per billion or something, you may have it in your drinking water every day. So aren't the regulations more related to the output rather than the input?
Well, I'm going to be a little bit different than your prior speakers. I'm going to admit to not knowing everything 100% is factually correct. What I will say is this. You need to talk to somebody in the industrial pre-treatment process in the department and find out exactly what they do. It's my understanding, I could be wrong, that they bring in material and they check for what it is. They check, as the senator talked about, the ability of a wastewater treatment facility to handle that, and then finally the outflow from that wastewater treatment facility. Right. But that's only my understanding.
They regulate both ends. The pre-treatment standards are regulated by the NGIPTES permit, where they're constricting the pipe as to what the industry can put into the sewer, because they want to make sure that whatever the sewage is can be adequately treated by the sewage treatment plant. And then they have a constriction on the pipe coming out of the sewage treatment plant to make sure that it's done its job. But they can't allow poison in. So that's where the pre-treatment standard comes from. It's complicated.
Mr. Chairman, can I just mention like 30 seconds worth on some positives about fracking?
Well, if you're not afraid of being assaulted on the way out of the room.
Since this has been going on in the Marcellus Shale area and other areas around the country, we've had a game-changing, huge explosion in positive economic value from hydraulic fracturing. I'm just going to mention a few. 17,000 new knowledge-intensive, high-paying jobs in the U.S., 395,000 additional jobs, $4.4 billion more in federal, state, and local tax revenue, $32.8 billion increase in U.S. chemical production. Not that anybody really likes that. $16.2 billion in capital investment in the chemical industry to build new petrochemical and derivative capacity. $132 billion in U.S. economic input. $83 billion related to increased chemical production. And it goes on and on. But in New Jersey, our energy rates are trending down for a change. So that means poor people pay less of their income to heat and air condition their homes. It's cleaner energy by far than what was used before. The footprint is extraordinarily beneficial from an environmental standpoint from natural gas as a combustion source compared with other things. Cheaper products, and finally, cheaper feedstocks for industrial production. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for indulging me. I appreciate it.
Well, we're not indulging. Listen, we want to hear all sides of the story.